It was August 9, 2010. I was 38 years old. My oldest daughter Avis was 12, and the younger pair, Johanna and John, were 9-year-old twins. I'd been married for 15 years and worked at an insurance firm. Every Sunday, while my wife and Avis went to church and the twins visited my mother's house, I took a walk. It was a clockwork sort of arrangement. My wife knew never to push me into going with her. I was an atheist and said I was staying that way. Of course, given what happened, my views have changed. It was just a normal day. Avis gave me a kiss on the cheek and told me not to forget my coat. I'd say it was maybe 65, maybe 68 degrees Fahrenheit. My mom picked up the twins and I started down my walk. We lived off the beaten path, so to speak. Our road was never busy and most of the area was taken up by farmland. A truck passed me on the road and I waved. I was pretty sure it was Art, although it could have been one of his sons on the way to church. Either way, he waved back. I took a turn to the right onto Hansel Road, a dirt path rarely traveled except by farmers, and today it was quiet. It was a good time to collect my thoughts. Every other time too. For this I'd turn back around once I reached Art's farmhouse, although occasionally his wife would pull me in for lemonade and gossip. But August 9th would be the day I took the longest walk of my life. I was passing by the cornfield when I heard laughter. To be more specific, it was a child's laughter. I paused then and looked into the cornfield. A pair of forest green eyes looked back at me. The girl seemed no older than 7. With red hair tied into twin braids, and I assumed she was one of Art's grandchildren. She smiled broadly. "Catch me," she taunted, darting back into the cornfield, her giggles fading away. Normally, I would have scoffed at going into the field. I didn't want to get dirt on my pants, but I felt a bit of concern for the small child running around by herself. So with a jump that I knew my knees would feel in the morning, I leaped into the cornfield. Using the sound of her laughter as my guide, I started pushing through the corn. The dry leaves scratched my face and hands, and dust kicked up into my eyes. I knew she couldn't outrun me for long. Even if she had boundless energy, I had longer legs. However, when I finally exited the cornfield, I was in a place I didn't recognize. My house was nowhere to be seen, and there was a light layer of snow covering the ground. I spun around, but the corn was gone, replaced by frosted evergreen trees. The temperature had dropped significantly. I was now thankful my daughter insisted I bring a coat. I shivered and spun around a few more times, trying to make sense of this dream I had apparently fallen into. "Mister." Her voice pierced through the cold. I finally saw her, peeking from behind a branch, grinning. "Catch me, and I'll show you the way out." And so began the chase. Getting smacked with tree branches was far worse than the corn. The needles tore at my skin like knives as I pushed past them to find that little girl. Whenever I got lost, I'd hear her laugh again. She was having fun, and I was not. The wet snow beneath my feet made it impossible to gain traction. Running was out of the question. I'd slip if I so much as stepped wrong. With every minute, I grew colder. My teeth chattered so hard my jaw ached. I broke from the tree line into a grassy meadow. I didn't expect the change, and I toppled over. The grass smelled sweet as honey, and a fat bumblebee trotted past my head, landing on a black-eyed Susan. It was heaven, but the piece of the meadow was shattered by the girl's laughter again. Giving up already. The warm sunlight made her glow like a tiny angel. But as I somewhat regained my footing, I caught something behind those big eyes I hadn't noticed before. Malevolence. She was toying with me, and she knew it. I can't tell you how many times the environment changed. One minute I'd be crossing the meadow, the next, trudging through a desert in the midst of a sandstorm. I had to rely solely on hearing her laughter in places like that. Sometimes we'd be back in the cornfield, and I'd shout for Art to get me out of there, but no one ever came. Other times we'd be running across a barren tundra, and she'd always be just out of my grasp. She wasn't always a little girl either. Sometimes she was a young teen with a gap between her teeth, humming sweet tunes. Other times, she was a ravishing model in her early 20s, with fiery hair and a flirtatious grin. And when she wasn't any of those, she was an ancient crone with a bent back and arthritic hands, clutching her cane but still managing to hobble away from me. She called herself Clarice occasionally. Other times, it was Lolita, Dixie, Isabella. I've lost count of her names. A straight answer was impossible to get, but she never lied to me, just avoided answering any of my questions. I knew she was my key out of this nightmare. I was in the meadow when I found her again. She was a little girl, taunting me cruelly. She'd stop, pick flowers, and run on before I could grab her, tossing the flowers about and singing nonsensical songs. I knew I could never win like this, so I dropped to the ground, feigning defeat. The little girl stopped. "Oh, are you really giving up now? You're so close." I remained still, gasping for breath. I heard her get closer and closer. "Mister, are you okay? Do you need a break? You've been going for a really long time." Once I saw her shadow, I lunged. She almost got away, but my hand wrapped around her braid, and I yanked her back so hard I could have snapped her neck. I pulled her into my arms and breathed out, "I got you." I had never felt so successful in my entire life. I'd finally caught her. She turned around and smiled sadly. "Can we play again? We were having fun. You don't have to go back. We can just stay here." "No way," I spat. "You have to let me out of here right now, or I'm strangling you with your braids." A little dramatic, perhaps, but my grip tightened around her hair to make sure my point was clear. She sighed before kissing my cheek, the same spot Avis did before church. Okay. When I woke up, I was in the middle of a plowed cornfield. It was springtime. The ground turned to mud and the water freezing cold. I peeled myself off the ground and began stumbling home. It was then I realized how tired I truly was. My mouth was parched, my body stiff and aching as if I'd run 1,000 miles, and maybe I had. I had one goal in mind. Home. I could finally go home. Despite tripping through the mud a dozen times, I caught sight of my house and immediately began to cry. Barely able to move, I just pointed myself toward the backyard. My wife should be home about now. She'd see me and come to my aid. 2 teenage boys were on the back porch. One was smoking and the other was playing on his phone. I couldn't recognize either of them, and my family had moved. I tried to speak, but it came out as a raspy moan. Both boys jumped out of their skin, the one smoking dropping his cigarette. They backed away, the shorter one raising a hand. "Sir, you're gonna have to," he trailed off, his eyes widening. They looked exactly like my wife's. I passed out on the ground just a few steps from the back door. When I woke up, I was in the hospital. I had been cleaned up, and an 4 was running into my arm. A woman sat next to my bed, fast asleep. She had a tattoo of a bird on her neck, a sparrow. Avis had always loved sparrows. I had been gone for a little over 7 years. When I didn't return from my walk, my wife reported me missing. At first, law enforcement assumed I had run off with another woman, but when that lead went dry, they realized I might have been a victim of foul play. Search parties were organized, people were questioned, but no one was ever imprisoned. They never found me, and life marched on. Art died about a year after I went missing stroke. The farm went to his sons, who sold the whole property to another family, oblivious to the fact that it was the last place I was spotted. The boys on the back porch were, in fact, my boys. I just hadn't been around when Johanna became James at the age of 13. I wish I could have been there to help him become a man. I apparently had a good replacement, though. After 4 years, it looked like I was gone for good. My wife met someone new. His name's Clark. They got married 6 months after they met. Clark was a real outdoorsman, a hunter, a fisherman. He loved camping and took James and John on trips every weekend, putting away money to help James afford his surgeries. Clark had 2 kids of his own, and I was soon a memory in my own house. Avis was the only one who hadn't given up on me. She pursued every lead, every chance that I might still be out there. A stubborn girl, my girl. But she'd grown from a girl to a woman since I'd been gone. It was like talking to a stranger, someone with my chin and nose, but a stranger nonetheless. My wife wanted to help me adjust, so she offered the guest bedroom while I recovered. I had been through hell. Bones broken and healed, muscles torn and strained beyond their limits. I was malnourished and could barely stand without a walker. But it was not a place I could stay. Clark's kids looked at me like I was the boogeyman that lived down the hall. Clark and I tried to be polite, but things became tense. My now ex-wife struggled with the decision of who she should divorce, officially. I was just in the way. But the little girl wasn't gone. Every night, I'd see her outside my window. She'd peer in with those big eyes and mouth the words, "Come with me." One night, I told my wife I was just going out for a walk.